Good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Miller. I cover boys high school basketball in the Colorado Springs area for basketballcolorado.com. You may have seen me at a couple gyms here and there, or maybe just on my Twitter page, or on a podcast with Matt at basketballcolorado.com. So I'm making this video because I want to discuss something. A question got brought up to me, and it's a question that keeps getting brought up over and over, especially this time of year when we're ready to get into the state tournament, is how does CHSAA determine the seeding based on their CHSAA selection and seeding index? So that is something I took a deep dive into the other night, and I wanted to find the information how those calculations are created. So let's take a look. So first of all, there's going to be two areas or two pieces of criteria that they use. The first is the RPI, and the second one is the max prep rankings. So let's take a look at those. Here we have the CHSAA RPI rankings. This is simply located on the CHSAA website. And here it shows each team, their record, their RPI, win percentage, opponent's win percentage, and their opponent's win percentage. So the question is, how do they come up with this RPI number right here? So if we go to the RPI FAQ page, this does provide the following formula to determine an RPI number. You take your win percentage times 30%, your opponent's win percentage times 40%, and your opponent's win percentage by 30%. Then you add those numbers together and you get the RPI. So over here, what we're going to do is we're going to multiply these three amounts by the percentage that we just seen. What I've done already is I've already copied all this information into an Excel sheet here so we can simply see how these calculations work. So we're going to take this win percentage and multiply it by 30% for Lutheran. Their opponent's win percentage times 40%. And the opponent's win percentage by 30%. Then what we're going to do is just simply tally these up. And you can see right here, our number is 0.646495764, which essentially matches the RPI provided by CHSAA. Now it is a little off, but the reason being is it's based on how many decimal points they use to measure this. So what we're going to do is we'll copy this all the way down. And you can see right here with our QC, all we did here is we took the CHSAA number that they provided in their RPI, and we deduct it from the calculation that we just completed. We see the number is 0. Now again, it's slightly different just for the simple fact is it's based on how many spots past the decimal that they're using in their calculation. So if we go ahead and extend these out, you're going to see that it's quite a bit out. It's looks like it's around 6 digits past the decimal. That's why we're slightly off here. But overall, this is how they create this RPI number right here. So now that we have the RPI taken care of, next we're going to look at max preps. Now CHSAA does have a max preps rankings page on their site. So if we go here, we can see here the rankings, the records, the rating number, and strength of schedule. Now this information is pulled from Max Preps itself. So go to the Max Preps rankings over here. We can see here the rankings, here is the rating, and the strength of schedule along with the record. Now, how this is calculated out, we'll look at the Max Preps page and see what it indicates or how they calculate this out. So here's some factors considered in the rankings, which is head-to-head, talent on roster, program history, strength of schedule, and win-loss record. But this data right here is pulled into CHSAA's website. Now there is something I did want to point out is this is updated twice a week. So if we go back here to the FAQ page, you can see rankings are updated 2 times per week during each sport's respective season. So what that means right here, if we look at this, we see it was last updated on the 20th. However, if you go to CHSAA's webpage, you can see they last updated theirs on this morning. Now, I'm not sure what type of criteria formula CHSAA is using. Maybe they have the formula from Max Preps and that's how they're able to update it daily. I cannot confirm that. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look back at our Excel spreadsheet because I copied all this data into our Excel spreadsheet as well. And there's not much calculation here per se to do within this Max Preps tab, this information here. I just copied all the rankings, their strength, their rating, and their strength of schedule here. Now we're going to look at the CHSAA seeding index and how it takes these two ranking systems and essentially combines them into one to get a final number to determine what rank each team is. So if we go over here to the seeding index, this can be quite confusing. You have your Max Preps ratings, and this is just the data pulled from the Max Preps page over here. You have your RPI, which is pulled from the RPI standings page right here. This number right here is pulled in to the RPI rating right here. So how do they calculate it, number one? And number two, what does normalized MP rating and normalized RPI rating mean? Well, what these two mean is essentially converting this Max Preps number into a percentage and this RPI rating number into a percentage to determine what the average is. So if we look at this right here, first place is 1, or we can look at it as 100%. Same thing right here in the RPI. So their average rating is a 1. So the top team will have a 1 or 100%. Now the remaining teams, how to determine their number is you take this divided by this. That provides the normalized Max Preps rating for Mesa Ridge, for example. And you take this for the normalized RPI, this right here divided by this. So everybody here, their ratings will be divided by the top seed here to get their percentage. However, we must convert this information first to a percentage or criteria in order to get this data right here. And this is where the calculation get a little bit confusing or tricky, so I'll try to explain it the best I can. So over here, I have my seeding page right here, and I have this data right here. So if we look here, we'll look at the top 3. We have Mesa Ridge, Lutheran, Dakota Ridge. Max Preps for Lutheran is 20.6602. That's what we have. For Mesa, it's 19.2531. And for Dakota is 16.9328. And same over here to the RPI, 0.649577, 0.642072, and 0.586187. So in order to convert these numbers, this is what we're going to do. And you see how up here this is 1 or 100%. And we'll look at this too in our spreadsheet. It may be easier seeing our spreadsheet so we're not going back and forth. But again, this is considered the 100% line right here because they're number 1. Now down here, this is essentially the 0% lines because they're last place. So Hinckley will be considered 0 and Lutheran is 100 in our range of percentage range here. So we got to convert this number here to a 0 in order to get an accurate percentage. So what we're going to do is we're just going to add this amount right here to this number right here. So we have this zeroed out as our 0%. So that's 0, and what we're going to do is the number we added to this is 0 out. We're adding that same number to the rest of the teams here. So we're going to add 20.7401 to the rest of these teams. Now we have an adjusted Max Preps rating right here based on 0 to 100%. We're going to do the same thing for the RPI, except this time instead of adding number, we need to zero this out. So we're going to minus this number. So now that's zeroed out, we got to minus this amount right here from everybody else so we have an accurate way to measure or to create a percentage for the RPI. All right, so now we have the RPI adjusted. Now, this normalized, again, this is going to be a 1 because of the top team. This is the number 1 team right here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take this amount right here and divided it by the max preps ranking for Lutheran. And we'll find a percentile for Mesa Ridge for the max preps rating, and same thing for the RPI. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a simple formula so I can copy this down where it divides everybody by this number here, and same thing for the RPI. So here's our percentage, and then we'll just average these two out. So this is how we're able to compare apples to apples right here because we normalize this number. So now if we look at our QC area right here, what we're doing is we're just ultimately saying, you know, our calculation of normalized max preps minus what CHSAA was showing on their max prep site or their seating site, and then same thing to the RPI, and then there's the average CHSAA provided, there's the average we have. So what we're doing here is we're just essentially QCing this to show that this is the proper process to get this number right here. So everything does match. So that is how you're able to get that number for the ranking system. So you may have the question is, well, what happens if one team is number 1 in max preps ratings and the second place team is number 1 in RPI? Well, then we can simply go through that process and show you how that would work. So I'll go ahead and copy this seating tab over. And this is how this is going to work. So in this example, say we'll flip-flop Lutheran and Mesa Ridge's RPI score. And you see the adjustment over here has been made. And now what we're going to do is we're going to simply sort and calculate again. So let's get rid of this information here for now. And we'll just recalculate this. So we'll sort by max preps ratings. Lutheran's number 1, so they get the 1. And we just run our calculation again here. So we have this calculation. Now what we're going to do is sort by the RPI. Now we can see Mesa Ridge leading in the RPI, so they get the 1 here. And then now we're just going to calculate everybody else. So all we did is we just ran that formula again. We just sorted by the top team here to see who was number 1. And then we sorted this and see who was number 1 of the top team in the RPI. Now we have both of our pieces of data here. We'll just run the average again. And now we're just going to simply sort by our total average here. And we can see right here, Lutheran is still the number 1 team, but not by much. Even though Mesa Ridge is number 1 in the RPI and Lutheran's number 1 in max preps, you see overall Lutheran's number 1 team in the standings. So that's how those standings are calculated right there based on your max preps rating and your RPI rating. But it must be converted first in order to convert to a percentage to get an average. So I hope that makes sense. It's extremely confusing. I understand. I tried the best I can here to write it out and explain it. But there is one flaw with this system, and that is it doesn't really measure based on the size of schools you're playing. And that's why I'm not a fan of the max preps ratings. And the RPI, CHSAA used the weighted version in football, which means if you play a higher team, you get more points. If you play a lower team, you get less points, that type of situation. So here's what I would like to propose myself. This is just a general idea. I don't know how well this would go over, but something I would like to see is that weighted system used in basketball. So for example, if we look over here, how we can do it is we could say if you play a 6A team and win, you get 150 points. If you lose, you get 75. 5A is 125, lose is 62.5. So basically, I'm decreasing everything by 25 points based on the lower seeds or lower classes. And then over here, all this is this amount right here divided by 2. That's it. So you get 50%. So the reason being you get 50% points is you get something. But also, if you're attempting to play a 6A team, you win, you could really come out, with a handful of points. If you lose, you still get something to show there that you're willing to play those larger teams. Now, here's a couple scenarios here on how this point system could play out. So if we look at this, we have, for example, 3 different 5A schools. And we'll say this first school played all 6A teams in the first 10 games. This second 5A school played only 5A schools, and the third team was only played 4A schools. So in this instance right here, say this team went 5-5, they would still get 1,125 points. Even though their record's 500, they're willing to play these larger schools. Now, the 5A team that played only 5A schools, their record would say was 8-2. They still get 1,125 points as well. The reason these two are matching up is because even though they're 5-5, they played larger schools than this team. They played the same size schools. Now, team 3 over here, say they went 10-0, they played only 4A schools. And you're not going to get that many points because you're not playing up to your competition. You're playing below your competition. So I think this is something we really need to incorporate, kind of a weighted aspect or, like a weighted ranking. And here's a great example of this. So I'm looking at the seeding index from this morning, and I see there's 2 teams I'm just kind of really surprised that where they're seated currently. And we'll look right here. These 2 teams I'm looking at is Palmer and Montrose. Now, if we look at these 2 teams, Palmer is seated 13 in the seeding, and Montrose is 4th. But let's look at the teams they play and their schedule. So if we look at this, Palmer played all 5A and 6A schools. Ultimately, their record came out as 15-8, and they'd get 2,500 points for playing these larger schools. Whereas Montrose played 3A, 4A, 5A, and 1 6A school. And if we look at their record is 17-6. So they're kind of close, 2-game difference. But they'd only get 2,300 points. And here's the reason why. If we look at this, you can see against 6A, Palmer played 9 games against 6A schools. And they're 6-3. They came out with a winning record. Against 5A schools, they're 9-5. Whereas if we look at Montrose, they're 0-2 against 6A schools. Yeah, they're 10-2 against 5A schools. But they've also played 8 4A schools or 8 4A games and a 3A game. So if we look at the strength of schedule here, and not necessarily just the strength of schedule, but the schools they're playing, Palmer should have the advantage here. Palmer should be ahead of Montrose and not 9 seeds behind them. So I think this is another reason why we need to incorporate a weighted scale within the system itself. Now, people may say it's not Montrose's fault. They're in the middle, in the mountains. They don't have a lot of 5A schools around them. That's fair. But you know who else isn't their fault? Is Palmer. It's not Palmer's fault. They're in the city and they have 5A and 6A teams. It's not their fault either. So you can't really ding Palmer for playing these games, to be honest with you. But Montrose, it's like, yeah, you're playing these games and the teams around you, but you're still at 17-6. If you're truly a competitive team, say with Palmer right here, Palmer's 15-8 against, like I said, 5A and 6A, and ultimately you're 17-6, but almost half your games are against lower level teams or lower class teams, and yeah, that's going to make a difference when you're in the playoffs. So just something I wanted to bring up. I'd love to hear people's ideas, love to hear their thought process. So thanks for listening. Hopefully I was able to clear up some questions you may have had about how the RPI rankings work, the max preps rankings work, and the seating index. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. And if you need a little more clear explanation, I'll be more than happy to do so. But thank you again. I do appreciate it. And enjoy the playoffs. And hopefully we'll get some good seeds tomorrow. Hopefully they'll be reviewing and seeing some teams should be bumped higher or bumped lower or whatever the case may be. So we will see tomorrow and enjoy.